All right. Hi, everyone. This is Madeline Acri, your energy storage manager from Soligent. I am doing a re-recording of the energy storage without solar webinar that was done earlier today. We just didn't click the record button. So here we are, take two. I'm also going to add in a few additional tidbits for, this is the version 2.0 for some pointers that I wanted to add on ways that we should be considering storage if solar isn't an option. Since this is the second recording I'm doing, you already know this is on YouTube. And if you're interested in the slide deck, feel free to reach out to our marketing team or my email at the end of this presentation so that we can get you any information that you further would want regarding energy storage from Soligent. Alrighty. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself as the energy storage manager, and then kind of dive into circumstances where solar may not fit for a home for any given reason, and then how we can still be incorporating storage, because just because solar is not feasible does not mean that we can't have backup. Backup can come in the form of a battery or a generator. So we can talk about kind of the pros and cons for each of those. And then we'll look at some options, sizing, how to size, and what are our different choices. Without further ado. So hello, my name is Madeline, and I am the energy storage manager. I've been working in the solar space since 2016, and I have been working in solar and storage for that entire time. So I've seen a lot of different solutions come to market, and really we're at such an exciting time for solar and storage right now because we have grid tie, off grid, you name it, we have an option. So there's no reason we can't integrate batteries to every situation that we might need from this time moving forward, which is really exciting. I live in Austin, Texas, and over the past couple of days, we've been having really severe weather events, and it makes me realize how paramount storage is in moments like this. So my goal is to really support and help installers, homeowners, account managers, everyone in the industry to understand how storage works and how to make sure that you're getting the right storage solution based on your home's needs, your home size, because there are a lot of options, kind of what's the best for you. And I really want to help educate and inform people on what you can do to really support your home and your family. So this is a snapshot of the Austin energy outage map earlier today. Things aren't looking good. I can be honest. It's been challenging to, experience this weather storm. I'm originally from Chicago, so I'm used to the snow, but our infrastructure in Austin and in the surrounding other counties of Texas just really wasn't prepared. And I want to bring up this specific storm instance because resiliency is possible, particularly from distributed energy resources. So we are in the right industry to support outages like this by adding storage, either from a home level or to small microgrids. There are ways to add resiliency to our situation. And something I want to mention is that I took this little snapshot, this ERCOT snapshot from a KXAN news brief, who's one of our local news stations. And ERCOT is the grid operator in Texas. The United States has 9 regional grid operators, and ERCOT is servicing New Mexico, Texas, and a little bit of Oklahoma. And here, ERCOT has, tells Austin Energy and other utilities when they should turn on or turn off different transmission, like cut power off to these people, turn it back on. But one point I wanted to make is that today, earlier, 46,000 megawatts of generation have been cut off. So of those 46,000 megawatts, 39% of the energy was renewable from either wind or solar. Already that statement is pretty remarkable that in Texas today, 40% of the grid, or 40% of a portion of the grid, is being serviced by wind and solar. That's really a strong, example of renewables taking the forefront of our grid. The other 60% of the resources that have been cut off are thermal energy sources, kind of what you would have already expected to be supporting the grid: coal, natural gas. The fact that 60% of this 46,000 megawatts is shut off from thermal energy sources is really alarming, because if we've considered coal and natural gas as our base load or peak performers for, a stable grid, these thermal sources being unreliable is alarming. And for new projects, gas peakers make less sense, A, if they're unreliable from a weather perspective, and B, if storage on a large scale, is in a weatherproof sort of enclosure, it has more reliability. So I'm curious to see how these events, which unfortunately are going to be more and more common in this day and age, are going to be mitigated, or at least kind of tried to be anticipated through implementing large scale storage. So let's talk about storage alone. Why might solar not be an option for you? Here we have this beautiful home, and it's shaded by this gorgeous tree. And my first instinct is not to cut down the tree. Trees are really important for myriad reasons, but having shade over your home is not always a bad thing. It provides some sort of temperature regulation, and shading is a good thing for most houses. So just because you have a tree and you can't put solar panels on your house doesn't mean we don't still want storage. You might live in an apartment. So many people live in condos or apartments or dwellings that the roof may not be accessible. So the good news is, if you live in a unit that is provided electricity, you have a main service panel. You have a breaker box somewhere in your house. Maybe it's inside, maybe it's outside. Mine is outside of my house next to the meter, the grid service meter. And as long as you have access to your main service panel, which you should, you can add storage to that. Your electricity can be provided from a battery through connecting to the main service panel. So just because you're in an apartment does not mean you are ineligible. So what if your roof has a lot of features? So these features that are above the windows are called gables. And the gables are pretty architectural features for roofs, but they really affect the array placement. I wouldn't necessarily want one panel here, one panel here, one panel here. An array is better off, if let's just look at this, in this case, this northwest facing roof. We have a really nice flat space, but if this were my home, I wouldn't necessarily want to put a nice big array facing northwest. I'd much rather be able to face more towards the south or southwest. So if your roof, from a roof architectural standpoint or home orientation standpoint, is somehow off, again, solar may not be good, but storage definitely is. We have a couple options in terms of what our storage looks like. The storage could be energy stored in a battery, or it could be from fuel powered by a generator. So let's kind of compare the two solutions. Many people are taking advantage of the investment tax credit, the ITC, when they get solar, because the ITC gives you a 30% tax credit, or I guess at this point it's 26% off of your equipment. However, the ITC only applies to storage if the battery is powered 75% by solar. In our case, the battery is charged 100% by the grid, because we are not putting solar on our roof, the battery can only be refilled when the grid is up. So because of that, no ITC. Since we have no solar panels, I want to reiterate grid charging only. So the system is in essence a little bit more simplified because the battery either charges when the grid is up or discharges when the grid is down, or discharges when you tell it to discharge. But it can only be refilled from the grid. Historically, people who had batteries had flooded batteries, which means they have water as a component for the battery. So you have to fill the battery with water. And these had to be in vented locations. So when the battery has off-gassing with the flooded batteries, they are a little bit more maintenance intensive. You have to equalize them once every few months. But now the majority of the batteries that we're seeing are either sealed AGM or lithium batteries. So with a lithium battery or a sealed battery, no maintenance is needed. No special requirements for storing it is needed. Typically, you want it in a moderately climate controlled place, but you don't, once the battery bank is installed, set it and forget it. Flexible installation location, again, typically you want them enclosed from the elements. So they're not going to be in the outdoors just sitting there. They would typically be in an enclosure, an outdoor rated enclosure, or they could be inside your house in a detached or attached garage in some sort of closet. We have a lot of options for installation with these sealed batteries. They're really good if you want just a little bit of backup. So while we're experiencing this mayhem in Austin, thankfully I have not lost power yet, or at least for an extended period of time. But a little bit of backup just for a few of my essential loads would really be beneficial, particularly for peace of mind, because there's a lot of craziness. We can feel the craziness, and having the resiliency is a really good supportive thing. So if I only want to back up a few loads, I can either install a separate designated loads panel, critical loads panel, sub panel, whatever you want to call it. Or I can install a home energy automation system that enables flexibility for my loads. The key here is that you're only backing up some of your loads, not the whole house. If you want your battery to provide more than just resiliency, you absolutely can. Demand shaving is doable, or time of use, meaning you're deploying your battery during instances beyond when the grid is down. And this is very common when you have really high residential electricity rates during designated periods of time or during designated periods of usage. So we have all these options for how your battery wants to perform. If we look at a generator, they require servicing. So it's much less of a set it and forget it. You have to make sure that it's an engine. A generator is a stationary engine. It's mounted on a concrete pad in your backyard. You need to make sure that a technician is confirming that it's in working order. It makes noise. So you don't typically want a generator to be running full blast all the time because it is distracting and disruptive, particularly at night. Apartments will probably limit your ability to install a generator. Maybe someone might put it on a balcony, but I think generators are typically a no-go in terms of apartments. Depending on your generator type, it is going to be fueled by propane, natural gas, maybe butane, gasoline. So if a real emergency was to happen, you'd need to make sure that your generator has enough fuel to be servicing your home based on your loads. So that's another important thing. In addition to the servicing, the oil has to be changed because it is an engine. You have to make sure that the oil life is good. The one thing I will say about generators is that going from like a small to a medium to a large generator is not necessarily a huge cost increase. Versus if you wanted to go from partial home backup to whole home backup, you're going to have to be paying a little bit of a pretty penny on adding the battery storage capabilities versus with a generator, you just get a little more fuel and the generator's a little bit bigger. Typically moving up in that size range is not, it's not that much additional cost. Every time I talk about storage, I always have to emphasize the need to do a load evaluation. It does not need to be so complicated, but identifying which loads you want run on the batteries and how long you anticipate them to be running for is the most important first step of talking about batteries. Even if you were considering solar, talking about which loads and for how long is the first step to answer your question. Then you can figure out your array size, then you can calculate your inverter, then you can calculate your battery bank. But identifying your loads and installing them potentially on a separate panel means you're hand picking these circuits and you're placing them on a battery supported load panel. So I really love this template. It's easy to use. I want people to have access to this. So please request it and I will send you a Google Sheet duplicate of this so that you can do some load calculations. And then it basically speaks for itself in terms of which inverter size, battery bank size, and array size you would need. All right, let's talk about solutions. I like the Generac Power Cell because this diagram is already considered a solar ready installation and they are designing the system with this solution in mind. So the Power Cell inverter is a DC coupled inverter, meaning that the PV is paired on the DC side rather than inverting to alternating current right off the bat. So typically the first two of these 4 30 amp DC ports is where you tie in your PV. In our case, we're using the second 2 and we're putting in 1 battery bank. So we're only using 1 of our DC inputs here for our battery. Then the output is going to be going to our protected loads panel. And then the charging when the grid comes back would be from the main distribution panel, from the main grid source. In this enclosure, you can install between 3 and 6 batteries. So the smallest option you can have is 9 kilowatt hours. And then if we were to add a second battery cabinet here, then we could have 6 battery modules in the first and 6 battery modules in the second, which would give us a total of 36 kilowatt hours. So very scalable solution from Generac. And then the inverter is a 32 amp continuous output. I wanted to add the battery size and the inverter output just so that you have a feel on if this is for like a medium sized backup or kind of where this goes in terms of small, medium, large home needs. So the continuous is 32 amps, and this does have surge capabilities if you really need to upstart one of your larger appliances. N-phase storage. So this is an example of the N-phase system if you were to have PV here. So I think if I click next, our PV is going to go away. Okay, great. If we eliminate the PV element here, we're really just focusing on the 3 storage-based components, which is the N-Charge battery, the N-Power smart switch, and then the comms kit, which is your communications adapter. The smart switch is a grid forming device. This really is kind of the brains of the operation. This is what is going to be where everything gets wired. So this is how you would tie in to your sub panel and to your batteries. And this is what provides a signal to say the grid is down, batteries, do your thing. So since this is from Enphase, which is a microinverter company, they're a distributed, I guess I should just call them a distributed architecture company, because in this case, this distributed architecture is manifested from the scalable batteries rather than microinverters because we aren't considering solar at this time. Because the end charges are scalable from 3 kilowatt hours up to 40, so we could start with one end charge 3, which is a 3.3 kilowatt hour unit, or you could do up to 4 end charge 10s, which are 10.5 kilowatt hour units, which would be 42 kilowatt hours total. So very scalable, 3.3 to 42 kilowatt hours. And because these are quote unquote AC batteries, because an N-phase system is all alternating current outputs, you add power as you add energy. So if you were to do 4 N-charge 10s, our total output is 64 amps. So we're able to scale in terms of power kilowatts and energy kilowatt hours. Outback Skybox. The way Outback has kind of branded the Skybox is they call it the true hybrid inverter. So it really is a highly flexible and functional piece of equipment. Earlier on our live session, someone asked about time of use in addition to demand shaving. So the Skybox has very high programmability in terms of when and how you want it to discharge. So I would highly recommend looking at the programming guide because there are 32 options for settings on the programming. So if you want to get really customizable on weekends or different demand kilowatt thresholds for when to discharge, the Skybox can do it. So in our case, the single Skybox is a 5 kilowatt unit, so it's 23 amps, but it is 23 amps flat, so there's no surge capability. So that's one thing I do want to note. However, if you want more than 23 amps, you can stack 2. So if you have 2 Skyboxes, you'll be limited to 46 amps, which is plenty. This is a 48 volt system, so more of a traditional hybrid inverter. And because of that, you can really scale your battery bank in 48 volts to any kilowatt hour size. So no limitations here. All you'd be doing really is adding more kilowatt hours to provide a longer duration of your backup, even though your inverter 23 amps or 46 if we're doing 2 is your maximum amount of power. Soligent Core is one of our newest offerings, and it's traditionally an AC coupled solution. So you would normally have a grid tie inverter to pair your PV in compared to the DC coupling with Generac and the AC or DC coupling with the Skybox. But here, we're just going to eliminate the PV and eliminate the PV inverter and focus on exclusively our battery-based inverter and batteries. So in this diagram, schematic, what you want to call it, of the Soligent Core, we have our little inverter in here. This is our battery-based inverter, and then we have 2 batteries to provide a total of 4.8 kilowatts of output and 10 kilowatt hours of storage. And this would go, again, on a protected load panel. The maximum output of this unit is 35 amps. So you definitely want it on a protected load panel because if you put it on a 200 amp service, we could not power all of those loads. So Soligent Core for protected load backup. Solarc really considers themselves an all-in-one solution, meaning this single inverter can be suitable for a lot of different options. It can be outdoor rated, it has generator integration, it can be stacked, really a lot of flexibility here with the Solarc. So for our single, it's called a 12 kilowatt unit, but the 12 kilowatt is sort of a nuance for if you have generator support or if you have grid support. In our case, it's really a 9 kilowatt output. So we get 37.5 amps continuous when the grid goes down. Again, similar to the Outback Skybox. It's a 48-volt inverter, so we can scale our kilowatt hours however we want in our 48-volt configuration. And this can be stacked. So if you do want to put this on a whole house home backup rather than a critical load, you can stack the inverter in single phase 12240 or in 3-phase 208. So lots of flexibility here. In this case, we would just not use our PV. This also could be DC or AC coupled, so don't have to worry about our PV input. Don't have to worry about our AC coupled input. Really just focusing on the battery input and then the critical load AC connection. The SMA Sunny Boy storage has a lot of different options. So the bundle is a 3-pronged solution, which resembles the N-phase storage solution. So the Sunny Boy storage is the hybrid inverter, and then the automatic backup unit is our grid forming device. So the automatic backup unit is similar to the N-Power smart switch. Our automatic backup unit, which is a diagram here, has a 200 amp breaker. So that means that we can service a main service panel on a single automatic backup unit. The Sunny Boy storage inverter comes in 3.8, 5, or 6 kilowatt options. If you get the all-in-one bundle, it's with the 6. So if we just talk about the 6 for an example, we get a 25 amp continuous output, and then we get either 1, 2, or 3 batteries, and these are BYD high voltage batteries that are in 10 kilowatt hour stacks. So that means that we could do 10, 20, or 30 kilowatt hours with our 6 kilowatt solution. So really, really sleek option from SMA for our home support option. Oh yeah, no panels here. So in this case, then no need for a Sunny Boy either. We're really just looking at equipment 1, equipment 2, and equipment 3 between the backup unit, the hybrid inverter, and the batteries. And last but not least, oh, sorry about this funny formatting, Panasonic Everbolt. So in this case, without considering the PV, we're really going to be installing only the inverter and then the battery cabinet. So this comes with its own battery solution. The inverter is a 23 amp output, and then the battery cabinet is similar to Generac, and in our case, it has an 11.4 option or a 17.1 option. And you can also add a secondary cabinet if you want to go up to 22.8 or to 34. So Panasonic really makes it easy with their, in our case, we don't even care if it's an AC or DC coupled option because there's no PV. So we're not concerned about how we're pairing that PV. We're really just focused on adding the inverter to our essential loads panel and having our battery feed that essential loads panel. Thank you for watching. I will just sit on this slide for a moment so that you can write down my email. I love to hear your feedback. I hope that you find this YouTube video useful so that you can approach homeowners and say, hey, so no solar, no problem. Let's look at storage, because backup is relevant everywhere. You know, I used to feel so thankful that I lived in a place where outages weren't very common. Here I am in the midst of a 3-day plus outage. So resiliency is relevant. Just remember that. All right. Thanks, everybody.